The call came in at 6:47 on a Tuesday evening, which I only remember because I was already 40 minutes into what should have been a straightforward pipe replacement under a kitchen sink in Pasadena, and my phone had been quiet all day until it wasn't. The woman on the other end didn't introduce herself right away. She said, "I have a building in Hancock Park. The main water line to the second floor is making a sound I've never heard before, and my contractor is telling me it'll take 3 days minimum to even look at it." She paused. "I need someone tonight." I told her I was finishing a job and could be there in an hour. She said, "Good," and gave me the address like it was a test she already knew I'd pass. I pulled up to the house just before 8. It wasn't the biggest property I'd ever worked on, but it was the kind of place that had clearly been maintained by someone who paid attention. Clean lines, original craftsman detail on the porch columns, a garden in the front that looked like it had been designed by an actual landscape architect, and not just whoever came cheapest. The outside lights were on. The gate was already open. Before I even reached the front step, she was at the door. Not a housekeeper, not an assistant. Her, Bren. She stepped aside to let me in. I was starting to think nobody actually took emergency calls anymore. "Depends on the emergency," I said. Her name was Wren. I found that out about 3 minutes later, when she walked me through the ground floor toward the utility stairs, explaining what she'd heard, and when the pressure drop she'd noticed in the upstairs bathroom, the fact that 2 of her staff had already tried calling 2 other services, and gotten voicemails both times. She talked the way some people do when they're used to having to be clear, like she'd learned early that vague instructions cost money. The sound was coming from inside the wall on the second-floor landing. Not a bang, not a drip. A low intermittent groan, the kind that usually means a pipe is under stress it wasn't designed for, or that something in the supply line has started to give. I pressed my palm flat against the drywall and listened. Then I asked if I could check the utility room off the back hall. She took me there herself without asking why I needed it. The pressure regulator was the problem. Original to the house, probably never replaced, and it had started failing in a way that was sending irregular spikes back through the line every time the demand changed. It hadn't burst yet, but it was working toward it. I explained that to her while I was still crouched in front of the panel, not turning around. "How long do I have?" she asked from behind me. "Tonight probably, maybe tomorrow. But you don't want to find out the hard way." I heard her exhale once, quiet and controlled. "Can you fix it tonight?" I looked at my watch. "I've got the part in my truck." That got a pause. Then she said, "Of course you do." It took me just under an hour. She didn't hover, which I appreciated. Most people either disappear entirely or stand at your elbow asking questions every 4 minutes. Wren found a middle distance. She came through once to check, asked one specific question about the regulator warranty, got a specific answer, and left me to finish. When I came back into the main hall to pack up, she was at the kitchen island with her laptop open and a mug of something that smelled like chamomile. "All clear," she said, not looking up. "All clear. Pressure's back to normal. You'll want someone to check the drywall on that landing in the next week or so, just to make sure there's no residual moisture." She nodded. "I'll make a note." I handed her the invoice. She looked at it, not in the way some people do, scanning for something to argue about. She just looked at it, then set it on the counter. "I'll have this sent over tomorrow morning." "That works." She finally looked up at me then, not in any particular way. Just actually looked the way people sometimes do when they've been too busy managing a situation to notice who they're managing it with. "You were faster than I expected," she said. "The part helped." "Yes," she said, and for the first time all night, something relaxed in her expression. "I guess it did." I drove home with the radio off, which I didn't notice until I was already on the freeway. I kept thinking about the way the whole house had settled once the sound stopped. That groan in the wall going quiet, and the way she'd stood in the hallway after, and just breathed for a second, like she'd forgotten to until then. I told myself I wasn't thinking about her after that. I was obviously wrong, because I noticed her name on the invoice confirmation the next morning, and read it twice. Wren Calloway. I'd heard that name somewhere before and couldn't place it until I was pulling a permit at the county office 3 days later and saw a project filing with her name attached to it. She was an architect, had her own firm on Wilshire, mostly residential restoration work, which explained the house, which explained the way she'd walked through it like she knew the load-bearing history of every wall. She texted 12 days later, not a long message. "The drywall on the landing had a soft spot. The contractor found moisture behind it. You were right." A pause, then, "Are you available to consult before they close the wall back up? I want someone there who actually understands the pipe layout." I stared at it for a while. Then I said I could be there Thursday. The house felt different in the daytime. The light came through the west-facing windows at a low angle that caught the grain of the original hardwood floors, and without the emergency tension from the first night, it just looked like what it was. A beautiful old house that someone was taking seriously. She met me at the door again, but this time in work clothes. Dark jeans, a linen shirt with the sleeves pushed up, a pen behind her ear, a set of rolled drawings under her arm. "Thanks for coming," she said, and meant it. We spent 40 minutes in the landing corridor with the contractor, while I walked them through the pipe path, and where the original supply line had been rerouted at some point in the 70s in a way that created the stress point. Wren asked good questions, the kind that made the contractor actually slow down and think, instead of just nodding. When the guy finally left to get materials from his truck, she and I stood in the half-opened wall together looking at the exposed pipe, and she said, "This house was renovated 3 times between 1978 and 1995, and whoever did the second pass did not care even a little bit." "It shows," I said. "It always shows eventually." She pulled the pen from behind her ear and made a note on the drawings. "That's the part most people don't understand. Every shortcut is just a delayed problem." I thought about that on the drive back to the shop. It stuck in the way things do when they land somewhere specific, not just the words but the way she'd said them. Like she wasn't performing the observation, like it was just how she thought. She called me the following Tuesday at noon. I was eating a sandwich in my truck outside a job in Silver Lake. "Are you busy?" she asked. "Finishing lunch. I have a question about the cast iron stack on the east side. My contractor's recommending full replacement, and I want a second opinion before I sign off on it." I told her I could stop by after my 2 o'clock. By the time I got there it was closer to 4, and the sun was already cutting low through the back windows. She'd been working in the garden from the look of it, dirt on her hands, the knees of her jeans dark with it. She washed up quickly in the kitchen sink while I looked at the drawings she'd spread on the island. "He says the joints are too corroded to reline," she said, drying her hands. "How old is the stack?" "Original. 1923. Then he's probably right about the joints, but that doesn't automatically mean full replacement. Depends on the condition of the pipe wall itself." I looked at the cross-section she'd drawn. "Can I see it?" She took me to the basement. The cast iron looked better than I'd expected. The joints were rough, but the pipe wall was solid, and I told her that. I also told her what to ask her contractor to check before they made the call. She wrote it down while I was still talking. When we came back upstairs, the kitchen was dim, and she flipped on the light over the island and said, "I don't know why, but I keep expecting you to be wrong about something." I looked at her. "Do I seem like the type?" "No," she said. "That's what's irritating." I laughed at that. She did too, quick and real, not like she was being polite. She had groceries on the counter from what looked like an interrupted attempt at dinner. Without any real preamble, she said, "I was about to make pasta. It's not complicated, but there's more than enough if you haven't eaten." I should have said I was heading out. I stayed. We ate at the kitchen island because the dining table was covered in blueprints, and neither of us suggested clearing it. She made the pasta the way people do when they actually cook. Not performing it, just doing it, moving around the kitchen with the easy efficiency of someone who's used to working in the space. While the water boiled, she asked about my work, how long I'd been doing calls on my own, whether I'd always been in plumbing. I told her I'd done 3 years in construction after I got out of school, then moved into specialized work because I liked the problem-solving part more than the production part. "What does that mean?" she asked, pushing a glass of water toward me. "Construction moves fast. You're always on to the next thing before the last thing is really finished. With service work, you actually stay with a problem until it's solved." I shrugged. "I prefer that." She looked at me for a second. "You just described why I left a bigger firm to open my own practice." We didn't talk about anything serious after that. She asked about a neighborhood I'd mentioned driving through, and I told her about a building there I thought was worth her looking at. A 1930s Spanish revival that someone had halfway converted into apartments and then abandoned. She got up and looked it up on her laptop, and we ended up standing over the screen at the counter, arguing mildly about whether the conversion had been done with any intention or just desperation. She was smart in a way that was hard to keep up with and didn't seem to know it. Or maybe she knew it and just didn't make a thing of it. Either way, it didn't feel like a performance. When she thought I was wrong about something, she said so without softening it, and she was usually right. I drove home later than I'd planned and sat in my truck in my driveway for an extra few minutes for no reason I could name. After that, the line between professional and something else got harder to see. Not all at once. It was more like the excuse kept getting thinner each time, and neither of us called it out. She'd text me about a pipe question and I'd come over, and the question would take 20 minutes and the rest of the evening would happen anyway. Or she'd be near a neighborhood I was working in and ask if I wanted coffee after, and I'd say yes, and an hour would go by and then 2. One evening in late March we drove out to this seafood place in Malibu she knew. Nothing fancy. Plastic chairs on a deck over the water, paper cups. The kind of place where the fish is right and nothing else really matters. We ate facing the ocean with the wind coming off it hard enough that she had to hold her hair back with one hand, and we both gave up on napkins almost immediately. She was more relaxed than I'd seen her anywhere near the house. The part of her that was always tracking something, measuring something, wasn't running as loud. She asked me what I would do if I weren't doing service calls. I've thought about opening a restoration shop, I said. Vintage fixtures, period plumbing hardware. There's not much out there for people doing real historic restoration work. Most suppliers have stopped carrying what you need. She turned toward me. How long have you been thinking about that? A while. Have you looked at spaces? Not seriously. She was quiet for a moment. The ocean did its thing, then she said, "You should take it seriously." I looked at her. She wasn't performing concern. She was just saying what she actually thought the way she always did. "It's a bigger move than it sounds," I said. "The best ones usually are." I asked her what she wanted that didn't look obvious from the outside. She didn't answer right away. The paper cup in her hands, the wind. Then she said, "I want to stop walking into my own house and feeling like a visitor. I've lived there 2 years and some of it still doesn't feel like mine. I don't know how to fix that." What would fix it? Someone else's things in it, probably. She said it simply, not sad exactly. The house is perfect on paper. I just don't know who's supposed to actually live in it. That landed somewhere quiet in me. I didn't say anything for a while because I didn't want to say the wrong thing, and she didn't seem to need me to fill the space. On the drive back she kept the music low, and we didn't talk much, and it didn't feel like a gap. It felt like the kind of quiet that happens after a conversation that actually went somewhere. After that night things changed, but slowly, the way a room gets dark in the evening. You don't notice it until it already has. She stopped texting with pretexts. She'd just say she was making dinner and ask if I wanted to come by. Or I'd finish a job nearby and she'd say, "What time do you think you're done?" And I'd say 7, and she'd say, "Come here after." No project reason, just that. I got a glass at her house before I realized I had one. She started keeping the kind of beer I drank in the back of her fridge. Small things, easy things, the kind that don't feel like anything until you add them up. I should have felt settled by all of it. Instead I kept waiting for it to correct. Like the whole thing had a natural ceiling and I just hadn't found it yet. Wren was the kind of woman who had her name on a building. Literally, glass letters on the front of a firm on Wilshire Boulevard. She'd been featured in 2 architecture publications I'd seen thumbnails of on her desk. She hosted dinners for people who talked about projects in cities I'd never worked in. And I was the guy who'd showed up with a pressure regulator at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday and somehow never fully left. She caught it one afternoon in April. We were on the back porch with coffee and she'd been telling me about a project in Pasadena and stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. "Where are you right now?" she said. "Right here." "No, you're not." She set her mug down. "You do this thing where you go somewhere else while you're still sitting in front of me. What is it?" I didn't answer fast enough and she knew that meant she'd landed on something real. "Say it out loud," she said. I looked out at the garden. "I wonder sometimes when this starts feeling like an experiment to you." She was quiet. Not hurt quiet. Thinking quiet. "What would an experiment look like?" she asked. "Something that's interesting for a while and then isn't." She didn't answer right away. She picked up her mug and looked out at the same section of garden I'd been looking at. Then she said, "I had dinner last month with someone my friend set me up with. He had the right job, right neighborhood, drove the right car. By dessert, I was watching the door." She looked back at me. "I don't watch the door when you're here. I haven't watched the door once." I didn't know what to do with that. I wanted to believe it. I mostly did. But the part of me that had been running a low-grade warning signal since this started didn't turn off because she said a true thing. "I'm not easy to bring into your world," I said. "That's not self-pity, it's just logistics." She made a face that wasn't quite an eye roll but was close. "What does that mean, my world?" "Wilshire Boulevard. The people you have dinner with. The projects." "You think I can't bring a plumber to dinner?" "I think it might be more complicated than that." She stood up. Not dramatically, just stood. "Come with me somewhere this weekend. There's a site visit on a project in Ojai. I want an extra pair of eyes on some original cast iron they found in the foundation crawlspace." She looked at me steadily. "Bring your tools, you'll be working. I'm not dressing you up and putting you in front of people. I'm just asking you to come." I went. The site was a 1940s hacienda-style house halfway up a hill outside of town. The crawlspace was exactly as advertised. We spent 2 hours in it together while she measured, and I documented what we found in the pipe system. And the whole time she talked to me the way she always did, like I was exactly the right person to be talking to and the setting had nothing to do with it. When the structural engineer showed up later, she introduced me by my full name, said I was the best diagnostic plumber in the county, and moved on like there was nothing to add. I stood there for a second after that and felt something I didn't have an immediate word for. On the drive back, she had the windows down and music on and didn't ask what I was thinking, which was good because I wasn't sure I had the answer yet. We stopped for food at a spot near the highway, a counter service place with outdoor tables and no pretense, and she ordered without looking at the menu because she'd been there before and told me what was good. I asked her how often she came out this way. Whenever a project brings me, or sometimes just when I need to get out of the city. She looked at me across the table. You could come more, to Ojai, to wherever. I don't really care about the location. She said it like it was obvious, like she was tired of things being less obvious than they were. I looked at her across a paper basket of fries in the late afternoon light on a hillside outside of town and thought, okay, maybe this is what it looks like when something is actually real and you just keep waiting for it to stop. After Ojai, it got easier to stop second-guessing, not because anything dramatic happened, but because I started to notice the pattern. She didn't introduce me as the plumber, she introduced me as Brennan. She didn't act different when other people were around than she did when they weren't. Whatever she was doing with me, she was doing it the same way in every room. The night I actually believed it was in May, about 4 months after the first call. She had a small dinner, 6 people at her kitchen table, a tight group, no staff. She cooked herself. I knew going in it was going to be a test of something, even if she wasn't framing it that way. One of her guests was a developer who'd worked with her for years, the kind of guy who knows exactly how much everything in a room costs and wants you to know he knows. He was friendly in a way that made me feel like he was filing me under something, but I couldn't tell what. At some point he asked me what I did. I said I ran my own plumbing operation, service and diagnostic work, mostly historic properties. He asked how I'd come to work with Wren. She answered from across the table before I could. He fixed a problem in 2 hours that 2 other people told me would take a week, she said. Naturally, I kept calling him. The developer laughed. So did everyone else. And that was it. No follow-up, no adjustment period, no weird thing I had to recover from. Later that night, after everyone left, she was rinsing dishes and I was stacking them, and she said without looking up, "You survived, wasn't sure I would." "I was," she said. I put a hand on the counter beside her and she looked up at me. Something in her face was different. Not vulnerable exactly, but less defended. Like she'd put something down and wasn't planning to pick it back up. "I think I've been in love with you since the crawl space in Jai," she said. I almost laughed. "The crawl space. You had a flashlight in your teeth and you were explaining the pipe grade to me and you were entirely focused." She turned back to the sink. "I don't know. It just hit me right then." I took the dish out of her hands and set it down, and she turned toward me and I put my arms around her, and she leaned into it like she'd been waiting for exactly that. And nothing more complicated. That was the night I stayed. The weeks after that were different in all the ways you'd expect and a few you wouldn't. She left notes in the kitchen when she left early for a site visit. I started keeping my work bag by her back door so I didn't have to drive back across town before morning jobs. The house stopped feeling like hers and started feeling like somewhere we both were. One Saturday in June, she asked me to come with her to look at a commercial space near Highland Park. She said a colleague had flagged it and she was curious. I said sure. It was a corner building from the 1930s, brick, wide windows, a front room that got good light, a back area that had been used as some kind of fabrication shop. I walked it out of habit, checking the plumbing access, the drainage situation, the condition of the utility rough-in. It was solid. Better than solid. "What do you think?" she said, standing in the middle of the back room. I looked around at the shelves, the service sink, the amount of workable space. Somebody could do a lot with this, a restoration supply shop, for instance. I stopped. She was standing in the center of the room with her arms folded and her chin up, the way she looked when she'd already decided something and was watching to see how long it took you to catch up. I'd seen that look before. In the landing corridor with the contractor, at the dinner table. In Ojai. "Wren, I reached out to the listing agent 3 weeks ago," she said. "The lease terms are reasonable. The space has the right zoning. The plumbing infrastructure is already commercial grade." She said it all the way she said everything, direct, no decoration. "I know what your restoration shop looks like because you've described it to me. This is it." I looked at the room. The light was coming in at a low angle through the west windows, catching the old brick, and I stood there with everything I'd been keeping at a distance suddenly about 3 feet in front of me. "You can't do this," I said, even though I already knew she could. "I've consulted on the space. I know what it would take to build it out properly. I have a contractor I trust who could start in August." She walked toward me. "I'm not handing you something, Brennan. I'm offering to help you build what you've been describing since the first time you actually talked to me. It's too much. It's not charity, she said. It's investment. You know the difference. I looked at her for a long time. She held it. She always held it. Why? I said. And I meant all of it. She didn't look away. Because I want to know where you're going to be in 5 years. Because I want to drive past a building on a corner in Highland Park and know you're in it doing work that matters to you. She put one hand flat on my chest. And because I have spent 2 years of my life in a beautiful house that never felt like home. And in 4 months of knowing you, it finally does. That last part hit me somewhere I wasn't ready for. I put my hand over hers and didn't say anything for a moment. The room was quiet. Somewhere outside a car went past and the light moved and settled again. Okay, I said. Just that. She nodded once, like that was exactly the right word. In the truck on the way back to her house, I kept my eyes on the road and she had one hand resting on the console, close to mine. Neither of us needed to say anything. The building was behind us, the house was ahead, and for the first time since that Tuesday night in November when I'd pulled up in the rain, with a part I happened to have in my truck, I stopped waiting for the thing that would tell me this wasn't real. It was real. It had been real for a while. I'd just been the last one to figure that out.